So if you wanted to know, read the code. But the question is not,
to them or not.
The question is not whether you can read the code. The question is whether you stand for anything, Mr. Gaetz. The question is, do you stand for anything? Does anything you say mean anything to you?
I merely am seeking your own ability to define your own amendment.
Are you really so soft on communism now, Mr. Gaetz? I am shocked.
Soft on communism?
So
You're soft on definitions within your own bill.
You would prosecute.
Soft on the basics of the English language. Soft on the interpretation statutes, mechanisms by which a Border Patrol agent would have to apply this.
They won't.
You know what? A Border Patrol agent isn't going to have this.
Mercifully, the gentleman is out of time. Mercifully, the gentleman is out of time. Okay. Woo. Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman seek recognition?
I guess so.
The point of order is withdrawn, and Mr. Gaetz is recognized.
Thank you. I yield to the sponsor. If the sponsor would be willing to engage in a colloquy with me, would you consider the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be a totalitarian dictatorship?
Mr. Gaetz, I give the same answer that Representative Lofgren gave before. These are not new terms of art. These are the terms used in current law. And so we are merely applying current law to protect people, and in particular, in this case, those that are fleeing communist dictatorships. If the gentleman, his objection is that this definition is overbroad.
No.
You
yielded to me. I'm asking you a clarifying question.
If you would yield, if you would respond to my question, which is, if this amendment is narrowed to communist dictatorships, will you support it?
Well, again, Mr. Schiff, I'm just trying to understand what your
amendment
says.
I guess your answer is no, then, Mr. Gaetz.
Well, that you perhaps assume too much, my friend.
Your answer
because
is
yes. I'm asking what you mean by totalitarian dictatorship and just whether the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would qualify. It's just a yes or no question.
Well, I certainly think.
Forgive me for not knowing the list that Ms. Lofgren
Would you like an answer, Mr. Gaetz?
I
certainly consider Saudi Arabia to be a dictatorship. Yes, I do.
A totalitarian one?
Mr. Gaetz, my question is, if your problem with this amendment is you think it's
Mr.
overbroad...
Schiff, I'm not stating a problem with the amendment. I am merely asking you what it means.
My question then, Mr. Gaetz, is
what is the difference between a dictatorship and a totalitarian dictatorship?
My question...
Since Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship...
There is a difference between totalitarianism and dictatorship.
Well, sure, I'm asking you to explain the differences of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
That's really the question, Mr. Gaetz.
Why can't you just answer whether or not your amendment would apply to them?
Mr. Gaetz, this is just a rhetorical exercise.
It's a serious effort to understand whether or not your amendment applies to the kingdom.
If your question is sincere, which I know assumes too much, but if it is, then will you support the amendment confined to communist dictatorships? Yes or no, Mr. Gaetz?
I'm probably not going to support the amendment either way. That
well,
doesn't
there you go.
I don't want to know what it means.
Then what about all the rhetoric you constantly espouse about standing up to communism? Here you're saying someone fleeing communism, if they're interdicted between ports, then they will not qualify.
Right,
doesn't matter what kind of regime.
There is a mechanism by which one seeks asylum for those very reasons, and it's not showing up and creating an entire loophole in the asylum
So this whole thing about Saudi Arabia is just a red herring, right?
I'm just curious to know whether or not you consider them qualifying under the bill.
Your curiosity,
and I would burned 2.5 minutes.
Consistency.
You know, Mr. Schiff, people on the border don't get to have a debate like this, like you know how to. It's not your time, Mr. Schiff. I'm reclaiming my time.
Mr. Gaetz has the time. Mr. Gaetz has the time.
Say you do.
Mr. Gaetz has the time.
Look, on the border, someone doesn't get to have this joyful little colloquy with you. A Border Patrol agent has to look at someone and assess whether or not they're going to let them in or not. And I'm just, for clarity, even though I'm not going to support your amendment, I'm going to support the bill. In the unlikely event that your amendment were to be adopted, I simply want to know if someone encounters someone from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, whether or not the exception that your amendment affords would allow that or not.
Well, as I said, I'm using the existing definition, Mr. Gaetz. My question
to you is,
will you live up to your anti-communist rhetoric? Will you live up to your anti-communist rhetoric, or is it just a lot of talk from you, Mr. Gaetz?
I don't think you have to blow a hole through the asylum system to oppose communism.
I guess it's just a lot of talk with you. Nothing more than a lot of empty talk.
I just want to know if the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is included or excluded. How is this so difficult for you? Well, do you have any compassion for the people who would have to make this assessment on the border? I just want to know.
Would you care for me to read the code section to you?
Gladly.
The existence of a single political party organized on a dictatorial basis with so close an identity between such party and its policies and the government policies of the country in which it exists, and the party and the government constitute an indistinguishable unit, and the forcible suppression of opposition to such party. That is how the code currently defines a totalitarian party
would you define Saudi
and a
Arabia that way or not?
totalitarian dictatorship.
Would you define them that way or not, Adam?
So if you wanted to know, read the code. But the question
would you
is
apply
not.
to them or not?
The
It's
question
your
is
amendment.
not whether you can read the code. The question is
You wrote the
whether you
amendment,
stand
and you
for
can't say
anything,
whether it
Mr.
applies
Gates.
to a specific
The question
country.
is, do you
Why does this
stand?
pain you so
do you
much?
stand for anything? Does anything you say mean anything to you?
I merely am seeking your
Are
own
you
ability
really
to define
so
your own
soft?
amendment.
Are you really so soft on communism now, Mr. Gates? I am shocked.
Soft on communism.
So
You're soft on
And
definitions
you would
within your own bill.
You would prosecute.
Soft on the basics of
you
the
would
English
prosecute
language. Soft on the
deny
interpretation
asylum
statute
to someone
mechanisms
fleeing
by which a Border
communism
Patrol agent would
merely
have to apply
because
this.
they won't.
You know what? A
wait
Border
in
Patrol
Mexico
agent
to
isn't going to
be
have this.
Mercifully, the
victimized.
gentleman is out of time. Mercifully, the gentleman is out of time. Okay. Woo.
Should we have unanimous consent to
No,
continue?
no, everybody's out of time. Everybody's out of time. Does anyone seek recognition? Gentleman's recognized.
I yield first to Mr. Schiff.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I just want to see if I can wrap my head around the opposition to this amendment. I guess the opposition began by saying this is too broad. This is too broad. The definition of the code is too broad because it might apply to Saudi Arabia. Well, God forbid we should be concerned with dissidents fleeing the Saudi regime, dissidents being hunted down around the world. I guess my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would find it preferable if the dissidents are cut up into little pieces in a Turkish diplomatic facility or a Saudi facility in Turkey. Yeah, there are Saudis who are also persecuted and put at risk, and some are captured and some are forcibly...
Why was that so hard to say?
May I please finish? I haven't yielded, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman has the time.
There are Saudis who are deserving of protection from the regime. They are fleeing. There are, in fact, Saudis who are American residents, who are journalists, who were cut to pieces with the participation of the Crown Prince. But if your objection is, no, we have to protect the kingdom at all costs because, of course, the kingdom has been so good to us. They've constricted oil sales because they're so good to us. We really need to look after the Saudis, and God forbid we should be concerned about people fleeing Saudi Arabia. But if that was the concern, this was too broad, I offered to narrow it so that the amendment would precisely match the rhetoric on the other side, this grave concern you so often express for those fleeing Venezuela and Cuba and Vietnam and elsewhere. But no, that's no good either. Is that maybe too narrow? Are there too many communist regimes, some that you're okay with and some you're not okay with? I don't understand the opposition, except for the fact that, well, I guess all the talk about being tough on communist regimes doesn't seem to matter when we're talking about the political value of the border security argument. And with that, I will yield back.
Mr. Biggs seeks recognition.
Yes, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you so much. I'll yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Chairman, the great irony is that I agree with Mr. Schiff as to Saudi Arabia. I just wanted to hear him say it. I am frustrated deeply by the actions of the kingdom as a totalitarian regime. I think that particularly I am aggrieved at what they did in Pensacola, where a Saudi officer opened fire on my constituents, killing 3 of them and injuring others. And so don't just assume that because I'm asking a question about the vagueness of a term that I disagree with the underlying point that might be expressed
Outstanding,
on the
then
other
you'll
side
support my
of
amendment.
the aisle. It was what the committee just witnessed was recalcitrance as a replacement for reason in our discourse. And the critique of the language as vague is clear because while you're able to cite documents that cite other criteria, what we have observed having gone to the border is that oftentimes these are real-time flashpoint decisions that have to be made at scale because you get hundreds of people showing up and a Border Patrol agent or 2 having to process them. So I wasn't attempting to disagree with Mr. Schiff.
Will the gentleman yield?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, Mr. Biggs has time. You know what? Mr. Chairman, I could have had the opportunity to have a more extended discussion with Mr. Schiff had he been willing to yield some of his time, but instead, I guess we had to go through all of this. But I'll yield back to Mr. Biggs.